everyone, and welcome to this episode from Stories from the Stradling Collection. In this episode, I was fortunate to be joined with Dr. Oliver Kent, who has taught ceramics and the history of ceramics from the Bristol School of Art and UWE. In this episode, we deep dived into Ken's collections and how each and every one of them were unique in their own right, but also followed a vision Ken wanted to illustrate. This was a great conversation, and I hope you enjoy listening to it. We kind of go into his collection. How did you know Ken? And, do you remember when you first met him?
Well, I was a student in Bristol doing ceramics at the art school, and there were places where you could see contemporary ceramics, and one of those was in the shop. So you would come in to find things, to look at things, occasionally buy things, but generally couldn't afford it. So one was aware of Ken as part of the Bristol scene, but certainly personally didn't interact with him. I mean, other students did, particularly the design students from the construction course, furniture designers and so on. So Jeremy Cornwall, who's the art director, was a student with me at Barrett at the same time. I think he came here and did sort of placements with the guild. So there was contact between Ken and the students, but not me personally. I really got to know Ken in 2006 when the trust was being formed.
Okay.
And he was then working with his various best friends, Colin Beals, June Lancaster, Anthony Shaw, deciding what to do. And once he decided he wanted a collection and a trust, he needed trustees. And they wanted somebody who had connections with education. They quite liked the idea of a maker. And I was Colin Beals, who was one of his very closest friends, an architect. I used to come to my evening classes for quite a long time, and Colin and I became quite good friends. And so Colin asked me if I'd come and meet Ken. And Ken, of course, he always worked in terms of networks and friends. Great networker, but he had a body of friends, and they were kind of layered outwards, I think. So I was distinctly an outsider coming in, so I think that was. You then gradually got to know him from there. I found him quite austere and not intimidating, but he was studying you, if you know what I mean. So that you did feel sometimes you had to tread carefully to find out where you stood.
And then when you kind of talked to him more, when you got closer to him, did you feel like he became less intimidating, more?
Yes, he had clear views about the way that the objects should be thought about, the way that and how he selected them. So I guess I challenged him sometimes by saying, should we buy this, or should we have that, or should he rather at that point? And sometimes got a very flat no. But on another occasion, he'd been out on a buying trip and had bought some John Leech's and some Walter Keeler's. And he brought them in here. They were going to be sold in the gallery, in the shop primarily. But he'd already selected one of the John Leech's as a piece he wanted to keep. And he was looking at the Walter Keeler pieces and just called me in and said, "Which one should I buy? Which one do you like best?" And I immediately...
A lot of pressure.
Yeah. And there was a teapot, which is in the collection, with kind of knobbly spines on the handle, and which I would... dearly have loved to own, really. I couldn't possibly afford it, but I think he would have paid whatever price, but the selling price of the gill would have been £400 or £500. And he just said, "Fine, right, put it on one side." That he'd accepted my judgment.
Nice.
But he didn't like. He very much saw the objects in terms of their aesthetic meaning, perhaps the way they might work in a domestic setting or whatever. He used to grumble at me sometimes when talking to visitors because I would talk about process and materials. And he said, "I'm not interested in the process and materials, I'm interested in the thing."
The actual product.
The product. I had to then kind of debate with him why it was important to think about the making methods and the materials and so on as well, because often the two things interact. Yeah, so I didn't have a strong knowledge of what had gone on in the past. I didn't have the connections in the main into his existing networks. Being asked to be a trustee, you thought, "Oh wow, sweet shop," and then realising that although one thought one was very knowledgeable, that there were things here, particularly the glass, about which I had no starting point really at all. I'd done a little bit of glass at university, but only the basics, and I knew next to nothing about it. And I found some of it, aesthetically really interesting. So that kind of opened my mind to that. I think I enjoy working very freely. I like the sort of tactile qualities of clay and working very fast. And that links into some of the artists that he enjoys, like Dan Arvide, who I guess as a teacher and as an artist was somebody who encouraged that approach to ceramics that I was taught. My tutors were often pupils of people like Arvide and some of the Scandinavian glass, particularly the Merrick Hogland stuff. I'm kind of looking around at some big yellow chunky mug over there, which is very quickly blown, the glass is slightly twisted, the hand is stuck onto it. And I realised that there was that the dates of those were similar to the dates of the Arvide pieces. Okay, so what was going on in clay, that I do know about, has a parallel state in glass. And then I looked back at the glass workshops we did at college and thought, that's what they were trying to teach us.
Now it all makes sense.
It started clunk, various sort of banging noises in my head as it all kind of links up. And I suppose that linked to what I wanted to do and make, or the way I made, but also made me look at glass. I then realised that my parents had a piece of Hogland glass that I'd taken for granted. They'd had it for years, small piece, and but that I'd always rather enjoyed it. So it's called the apple vase, and it's a sphere of glass, and it's like a paperweight almost, very heavy at the bottom, a tiny hole on the top, so you just put a single flower in it. It's about the size of a Bramley apple. But the weight and the form of it, it's quite cuddleable, although it's cold. Ceramic is more friendly than glass, but it's quite a sort of cuddleable thing. And I'd always enjoyed it as a child without a response to materials.
Yeah.
So I have bought glass. I have more glass in my house, just influenced by what's here. And sometimes walked into a charity shop once on the top shelf and thought, there's a gull vase. I'll have that, only because I knew it from here. As a piece of Scandinavian. I recognise a beautiful thing, and I like amber coloured glass, so it fitted that. But it was also suddenly thinking, wow, I know what it is. Ken has taught me something, the collection has taught me something.
And I've heard that his, relation to Scandinavia was quite important because, it was after World War II, people weren't really looking at Scandinavian glass and art, and definitely not looking at homeware in that kind of aspect, and seeing that as kind of a creative outlet. Did you notice that? Did you notice that Ken was trying to change kind of the field and make an impact in that?
That's distinctly part of his way of thinking. I mean, I think there's a couple of. I think the Americans were much more aware of Scandinavian design. I suppose the whole design activity goes on in the States during the 40s, whereas in Germany, which was quite a leading area, and in Britain, it grinds to a halt. Not completely. There are interesting things going on, that utility scheme, but and of course things like aircraft design, industrial design, which lead out into other things. But after the war, the Scandinavians are still making stuff, and they want to market it. They have the roots that existed before the war, but so things like Scandinavian porcelain and glass are coming in quite early on, actually. I think the collection has quite a few 1950s copies of House and Garden, and if you look through the what for sale pages in those, you see these bits of Scandinavian material popping up on the what to buy in the trendy shops in London kind of page. And they would have been rarities, but nonetheless they're there. And Ken notices that and is quick to start buying. The Hogland glass, for instance, comes in very early. The other thing is that, you get linking up other bits, he was taught at school by J. Barton, Bristol Grammar School, who was the headmaster, but he was a design critic and wrote about design, and also gave lectures on the BBC. He was a minor BBC sort of radio celebrity. And he gave talks to the sixth formers about design and promoted design and promoted Scandinavian design quite actively, so that Ken had probably quite a lot of influence from that in his way of thinking. Certainly interested in modernism, and I think from I think, from Barton. Barton was very motivated by trying to encourage the public to understand design and good design, using radio and writing and so on to do that. So that thing that Ken does later, partly I think from being excited by what he was taught.
Did Ken often talk to you about Barton, or did you kind of know that?
Somebody gave me a copy of his book. I think it might have been Colin, but there was clearly a need to know who Barton was. I don't remember him talking about him a great deal, but I think when one looks at the history, you can see that Barton and Crofton Gain, who was a furniture manufacturer in Bristol before the war, who was a great campaigner for kind of modernist design, who Ken had attempted to get a job with, but didn't in the end take it. But Ken clearly respected and, of course, collected things that Gain had designed for him from before the war. But the only thing Ken collected, that the collection is about him buying things for the shop and his house, actually going out and collecting vintage pieces or pieces from the past. That interest in Crofton Gain in the 1930s is one of the few elements where he does that. Generally, he's buying new stuff.
Yeah.
Well, almost entirely new stuff. That's. I think the only other older things are things that he bought when he was much younger. The Eltonware pottery that he bought when he was a kid.
And when you first went into the collection, or when you knew about it in 2006, what was your first impression of it? Were you very kind of intrigued by the amount of new glassware that he had and new homeware that he had, or was it kind of expected because you knew about him before? I
think the sheer breadth of it was extraordinary. I mean, I think I started off in ceramics via archaeology, but I like clay, but actually I have broad interests. The sheer range is extraordinary. It's the unique thing about this collection. It's not totally unique. Obviously, the V&A is a collection of design across the board. But to have, some call it a shopkeeper's collection, because he's interested in all the things that go to make up a domestic space. Well, that's the way I see it. Whether it's a teapot you use every day, or the decorative piece, or the decorative is slightly demeaning, isn't it? But the piece of art that you have on your shelf, he covers all of that.
Yeah.
And that is pretty unusual. You can build a room set out of this stuff, and we have got a good documentary, or the collection has a good visual record of the way his house was and the way that he consumed these things, so that you can see how he would consider these things as domestic objects. We tend to see them in here on shelves and piled up, or in a rather formal exhibition format. But it's good to look at those photographs of his house and see what he would do with object X. Where would he put it? How would he use them?
And did you, use these kind of as inspiration when you were teaching?
Yes.
Right?
Oh yeah. I would bring things here. But big things here. I would bring students here. Sorry, I guess I would take things sometimes to college, but not very often. Prefer to
bring students to the workshop.
Prefer to bring students here. I got the realisation quickly. I think almost the first group I brought in here, group of young foundation students who were at that stage doing workshops on a foundation diploma course for the first year that art students do before they choose their specialist subjects. And they would be broken down into groups gradually who were interested in design or ceramics or whatever. And when you got down to that group, I would do workshops with them. And one of the workshops I tried, this is before we had a gallery or anything here, would be to bring them down here and show them stuff and get usually a selection of objects out of them to talk about. And I was a little wary, I wasn't sure how they'd react. The enthusiasm and the interest and the kind of wide-eyed look on their faces, I thought, wow, this is great. I remember a student, Fran, who had she was more interested in fashion really, but she'd written her main A-level study on Marcel Breuer's furniture, and she'd been to the V&A and she looked at this, looked at that, or took them upstairs, and she saw the Breuer armchairs up there. And I'd said, with a few exceptions, you can sit on the furniture. She just said, "That's a Breuer armchair. I've seen those in the V&A." She said, "Did you say I can sit on it?" And I said, "Yeah, go and sit on it." And she said, "Oh, I always want to know whether it's comfortable." She said, "It's really comfortable." She said, "Can I stay here?" And it was that just absolutely delighted me. The others were interested, but her reaction was just wonderful.
Completely amazed.
I remember later on when Chris Yeo was the curator here, some of them were doing work experience and a couple of them were sent down here. One was the daughter of Potter, the other was definitely a fashion student. They were sent down here to Chris, and Chris obviously was worried about the state of the place and gave them a table and a catalogue and told them to start cleaning the pots. And I heard about this and I thought, oh, it's a bit rotten. Poor things. So I came down to check up on them, make sure they were all right. They were in the basement at a table with a bowl of water and shake cloths and dusters and things and the catalogue. And one of them was reading out the catalogue and find out whether they were, and the other one was mopping. Then they were taking. I said, "You two all right?" They said, "Yes, what's the problem?" I said, "I thought when you'd been sent on cleaning." No, we get to handle everything. Okay, you know,
they were like, just leave us
they
here.
They were
happy.
perfectly happy. That just, you know, if I wasn't already sold the idea of the value of the collection, that completely sold it to me. You know, this has a clear and obvious value. You can take it apart and criticise it in a range of ways, quite severely, I think, if you start analysing the whole thing. But nonetheless, you know, there are core values like that which Ken was absolutely delighted with. I mean, he would sometimes come in, and if we were doing an open session, you know, a session with a dozen students, he'd come and sit in and join in, and they would talk to him. He would be happy to chat to them about the collection and so on, or tell them where he got things. Or, of course, he knew a very large portion of the people who made these things, and many of them, you know, became friends. So he could add to their understanding of objects.
And were there any objects that your students pointed out that you might not have noticed when you first went into the collection? Or?
The Cardiff University groups were asked to choose an object and then design work which was inspired by that individual object. And they were encouraged, they were ceramics degree students at that stage, later on they were illustrators as well, but they were encouraged not to focus just on the clay. And they would come up with all sorts of interesting things that... embarrassingly sometimes my teapots, but they would draw out things. Somewhere there's a little tiny clay elephant which caught one student's eye, and I'd rather kind of treat it as a novelty rather than an interesting object. And she worked out that it was folded from a single sheet of clay. She drew it and then drew it and drew it and drew all bits of paper, and worked out that if you flattened it out completely, it was a circle of clay cut into and then simply folded up to make the elephant. And she made little paper versions of it to prove it. And she was she was more of a jeweller in the end. I guess she saw it as because of that. She saw it as a metal object, and the idea of taking sheet metal and bending it to make something was logical to her. Seeing the clay in that way wasn't difficult. Yeah, she made me see an object in a totally different way.
And was there any objects that you kind of had a favourite of? You know, obviously it's hard to pick, but was there any kind of favourite object that you had in the collection? Oh, now, favourite object. The thing that I remember defending and protecting was a pot by Robin Welsh. Robin Welsh, a studio potter who originally trained at the Leach Pottery before moving away and setting up in Suffolk. But his other big love was painting. And he's a close friend of Ken's, and for years, I mean, if you were a customer in the 1980s particularly, I suppose, you would almost certainly have ended up owning a coffee cup from Robin Welsh's pottery. He's very much an artist, but he set up the pottery so that he could manufacture domestic ware,
using moulds, and he did a standard range. He did specials. There are, but he did specials for Ken. So there are mugs in the collection with Bristol Guild written on, or the Bristol Guild this year to that year for its various anniversaries. And somewhere there's a giant one which just has Ken stamped into the side of it that he made for him personally. He taught me at art school, a wonderfully grumpy man, but he eventually gave up the domestic work because he didn't need to anymore once he'd succeeded as an artist. And he's known for his paintings, and he's known for these pots, which vary in size from quite small. This one's, the one I'm holding is about the size of a large jar of powdered coffee, I suppose. Just a cylinder, roughly thrown in a heavy stoneware clay. But they can go up to, I don't know, the best part of 75 centimetres or so high. But he then treats them as canvases. At some point he visited Australia and became absolutely besotted with the Australian landscape and the outback, and did lots of painting and drawing there. And many of the pots have, in effect, paintings of Australia on them, but worked in with glazes, with slips, lustres. He treated the surface of the ceramic as if it was a canvas, and the paintings simply wrap the object up, so there's no starting point, no stopping point. The pot becomes the painting. You can walk round it. You can, as I am doing, roll it in your hand to find the various things that are going on. Initially, perhaps you might see them as being kind of bands or blotches of colour, but I think then you begin to recognise the little aspects of landscape. This particular one has a rich kind of navy blue band at the top, an incised line bold, just separating, very intense blue, quite a typical colour for him. Then a band coming down to about halfway down. The three bands of colour they get larger towards the bottom. The middle one is mainly the original clay colour, but with a creamy wash on it, some red marks and some horizontal marks, then some black scratchy vertical marks, which are quite erratic and distinctly bits of. If you start to read it as landscape, they're kind of dried out bushes or distant trees. The painting extends in space according to the way you look at it. I think it's kind of like it's a rich dark. It's either storm or late evening, and then the lower part of the pot is absolutely crusted with a yellow slip that must project a couple of millimetres or more off the surface, which is partly blistered, and he didn't concern himself with the niceties of how the materials should be used. So this slip is blistered. It's probably got glaze materials mixed in with it, part glaze, part clay. The red marks maybe a prepared red underglaze colour intended for decorating under a transparent glaze. Sometimes he uses shiny lustres or patches of shiny glaze. In fact, there are little dots of shiny glaze on this, perhaps to create sort of watery marks. This particular one is it's certainly the best one in the collection. It's quite magnificent, and kind of pools and rocks and dried out trees, this night sky.
Very varied texture as well. And
it's very tactile too. I mean, it's painting, it's pot. You could put flowers in it if you want to, if you have to. The snag with this one is that it was actually given to the collection by Colin Beales, whose objects in his house seem to have suffered quite a lot, and this has been smashed into, I think, about 12 or 13 pieces and glued back together again.
Oh, okay.
Quite tragic. And at one stage, somebody here who was feeling we had too many objects tried to throw it away on the grounds it was broken, but I did manage to retrieve it. It's a shame it's broken, but it is an absolute museum quality object. It really is. I think it's certainly of all the Robin Welsh pieces here, it's absolutely the best. You could look at a lot of them to find another just as splendid as this one.
I just finished my history degree, but as a historian like yourself, was there anything that you were interested in from this collection that had kind of a very layered history with it?
Well, I got very involved with the Marcel Breuer Croft and Gain collection here because it's an exciting story. I think Bristol has a design history which is poorly documented, or not poorly documented, people haven't really explored it. And that relationship between Croft and Gain and the Bauhaus designers is an extraordinary thing that happened in Bristol. And when you start to look into it, you realise that there are more layers outside that which really have barely been touched on. It's actually, in the 1930s, there's a lot going on here. It really is. And there are a lot of people engaged with it. And, some of those people in later life, their careers are elsewhere. But there is a melting pot. There's stuff going on. So I think, yes, I have got quite engrossed in that. And we're working on a project now to try and get some funding for more research, to try and explore that, but using Ken's starting point. Ken's saving things and keeping things, be they, notes or catalogues and photographs, but also the objects point. I mean, I'm not a Bristolian. It's not about a passion for Bristol. It's just that there's a chunk of design history which is worth digging out.
Was there anything that you have recently found in the collection that you kind of want to look at maybe more in detail?
Oh dear, yeah, that's a difficult one, isn't it? New things pop up and you find things. Clearly recently it's been the Sam Hale objects which have attracted a lot of interest and attention, and
the exhibition. Yeah.
The exhibition. I think when the idea came up, the feeling was, that would be a bit of a sort of specialised subject that perhaps wouldn't attract a lot of interest. Whereas in actual fact, once you started drawing things out and finding more material, it became evident that there was a lot there. I think Sam Hale's drawing, Sam Hale's slip decorated dishes they are very beautiful things, and he's an intriguing character. It was interesting to have that new drawing appear that somebody had found at a car boot sale that was in the exhibition. There were two drawings in the exhibition. One was one that Ken had bought at auction. The other one was a chap who found a drawing at a car boot sale and then posted it on Facebook, and then I told him about the Stradling Collection, and he'd then in the end loaned it for that exhibition, which was an unknown Hale drawing, which I think he's now going to sell. He bought it for £10. He'll get a few £100s for it at auction. Now I can just see behind you a little clay car. Looks like a child's model of a car, which was on a shelf in the house when we were sorting out Ken's belongings.
Really?
We thought it has Tom scratched in the back of it, and we thought it was a model that a child had perhaps given him, and sort of dawned on one that looked vaguely familiar. And then it was Jeremy Cornwall who said, "Oh no, that was a present from Tom Caron, the designer." And now Tom Caron designed all sorts of things that we're familiar with. The marble run, if you've ever had those stacking plastic marble runs.
Oh, okay.
He designed the land speeder at the beginning of the first Star Wars movie. He designed three-wheeler cars, but he also designed the Reliant Scimitar, which was about 1980, I think, was a classic kind of sports coupe for Reliant. And one of the things that he enjoyed using was clay, and this in actual fact is a little model of the scimitar design part way through making it. He's playing with ideas about how to shape the back of the car. So it's actually it would be easily dismissed as a little toy. It does look, it's about the size of a corgi toy, and it's actually when you look at a photograph of a Reliant Scimitar you think, oh yes. It looks like one of those. And I showed it to a colleague at the art school whose father worked for Lotus, who immediately started, it's got that, and he said, no, absolutely. He said, it's not a Reliant Scimitar, it's an idea for it. He was really interested in it.
Yeah, and the more you look at it, the more you're uncovering.
It's not quite right. It's not quite right because it's probably one of a whole lot of them where Tom is sitting at his desk playing with a bit of clay, thinking.
Yeah.
It's a drawing. It's a designer's drawing. Yeah. And suddenly it moves from being something, what's that, to, wow, that's really interesting.
Yeah, definitely. Was there a moment that you shared with Ken that kind of captured who he was? And, you've described him as many things. When you first met him, he was a bit intimidating, but then once you got to know him, and he started letting you, have make your calls and make judgments. You know, he became a bit more of a closer friend. But was there a moment which you shared which kind of captured that essence?
We'd been working on getting the gallery established downstairs, and we wanted to make because we were looking at public access, so the gallery opened in 2014, so this is probably 2013. So we were thinking about how to use the upper stories of the building. On the top floor, where most of the furniture was, I thought it might be interesting to try and use, because the building space actually originally was smaller rooms and they'd all been knocked into one, that maybe we could use the furniture or put up screens and turn the top floor back into 2 rooms, and you present them in the way that Ken presents things in his own home.
Okay.
So I persuaded this was a good idea, and he and I went up there and started playing with furniture and moving things around. And I remember we had the photographs that had been taken of the house, and I was talking to him about the way he selected things to put them on. And he said, "Oh, I just put things wherever." And I said, "Well, I don't think you do." No, I don't have a plan. So I produced a photograph he had 2 living rooms. He had the sort of public one where people visited him, and then he had a room upstairs which is sometimes called the snug, which was rather more soft furnished, and it had more personal things in it which you were allowed into gradually. And in the snug was a side table with 2 chairs either side of it, and his favourite of Betty's paintings, which is a sort of green, orange, yellow still life above it. And then on the table, often his tables and things were quite cluttered, quite a lot of objects, but so there were a whole collection of bits of glass, metal, ceramic in front of it. And I said, "Well, look at the photograph." I said, "The objects in front of the painting are all responding to aspects of the painting, either colour or form, whatever." "Rubbish." I said, "But they are." "No, they're not. I just put things down." I thought, okay, fine. So we laughed about it and we carried on, and I thought, no, the point is he's got such a clearly established, but it was fun. It was fun doing it. It didn't last because things got moved away because the photographer needed someone to photograph things, and it all got disrupted, and it never really got finished doing it. But what I learned was the extent to which it's a bit like when you're driving a car and you know which gear you ought to be in, and your foot knows where the clutch is and where the whatever it is, you don't think about it.
Yeah.
And I realised that his aesthetic sense was so tuned that he could look at a shelf and place an object. No, that doesn't belong. He's not having that thought. He's just saying, okay, that goes there. That goes there. He's not having to kind of voice it in his head. He's just got this very clear.
And it became so kind of drilled in and automatic for him.
Yeah.
I guess from all the years of looking at different pieces of work, and from his childhood until now, he went to auction houses with his mum, and it's very interesting.
No business of going to visit people and saying, right, those will sell, those won't sell, he clearly had a very, very individual view.
People who are visiting the collection who aren't necessarily aware of him, how do you want them to remember Ken, with no knowledge or background of him?
I think that his legacy is demonstrating the value of having some kind of focus for good design within a community. Focus for art. You have an art gallery, you have the Alfini or Spike Under, whatever. The design making, a focus for that was what he had tried to provide. I think is what Croft and Gain tried to provide. And it's a loss not to have something like the Guild. I don't think it didn't have the same energy about it that it had when he was running it before the mid-2000s, and I don't think it was necessarily a very sound business either, because sometimes the aesthetic decisions are more important than the financial one. So as somebody who tried to drive public awareness forward, and is then, I suppose, he's putting up a challenge for other people to do that. Clearly, there is an issue that his own collection becomes a historic one. and is a representation of a particular space between I suppose in a sense 1930 and perhaps 2010, something like that.
Because I guess this collection is the only thing that will be able to speak for him, you know. So when people come in, this is the only thing that's representing what Ken is.
I think that's one of the important things about the project that Clea Witt and Peter Metcalfe and I and others are trying to put together to get more research done and published so that one can present him in that way, but also to draw attention to all the other things he did, because as with anybody, he engaged with things outside the business. He had a second business, Sparta, which was the interiors business, which ran for a while in the 60s. But he was also engaged in local politics and local design issues, planning issues. He contributed to the business of the M-Shed cranes, for instance, one of the people who funded that, the ferry boat system in the docks. He was involved in a 1960s magazine called Bristol Forum, which debated design and planning in Bristol, contributed to quite a contentious period of urban planning in the 60s and 70s. He had these other involvements.
So these other involvements, I think, will need to be more discussed, I guess, within the collection. Otherwise, people won't know about them.
I think with a lot of those things, there is partly what you're doing might help with that. There's a need to work through the documentary record, the memory record, to bring those things back into sight. The Sparta Interiors project, for instance, which was involved with Pitch and Pay Park, which is a modernist Bauhaus-inspired housing development in Sneyd Park. I'm not sure that we're yet aware, any of us are aware, what documentation there is for that anywhere amongst his papers, or whether in fact that's all lost. That's true of a number of these things that at the moment he's involved with the Design Industries Association, and there's a pile of paper, but nobody's gone through it. We didn't have access to a lot of that paperwork a few years ago. But also, they're all projects and somebody has to engage with them.
Exactly.
And finding some research money to put together projects that people can carry out on those things is an important way of making progress with that. And sometimes I think those projects will be things which are really about planning development in the 60s or whatever, where Ken will be, an element within that. But he did see, there are design issues around teapots or whatever, but he cared about the development of city docks. It's a design issue, it's just that he's going big rather than teapot.
Yeah.
And when people wanted to try and get the ferry boats going and rescue cranes for the museum and so on, those were things that he immediately stepped in to engage with.
And just to kind of end it, I guess, with your connection with Ken, with your knowledge of ceramics and your knowledge of art and furniture, has there been anything you have seen, today or recently, that would have caught Ken's eye? Which I thought, when I was thinking about that question, I was thinking, it'd be really interesting to see what people come up with, where, I always thought if someone who knew Ken kind of knew his eye for things, maybe pass things in the street and just see, I think Ken might like that.
I bought things once or twice, gave them to him, one of which he more or less instantly broke. Obviously wasn't a success. Found the bits when we cleared the house. I dumped amongst his kitchen belongings. Yeah, there are one or two things in the collection here which I've bought and found and given to him that he's appreciated. A while ago on eBay I spotted Peter Wright, was a close friend, a local potter whom he admired and was associated with Corsham. I spotted a Peter Wright piece on eBay, unidentified, and bought it and showed it to Ken. He spent quite a lot of time trying to persuade me that I didn't need it, I didn't want it. I've still got it.
He said don't buy it.
No, he wanted it.
Oh, he wanted it.
He was trying to ease it off me.
Oh, wow, okay.
I thought, I bought something he does like.
Very persuasive.
He was saying, it is a nice piece. One day I might give it to the collection, but he was quite keen to persuade me that you don't want that. What'd you pay for it? 25 quid? Oh, more than that. Elbow. That was nice. And then for his 100th birthday, I was one of his great friends, latest Potter friends, Marianne de Trey, down at Dartington, he knew very well, and had a very kind of close, affectionate relationship. And he sold her work in the shop for many, many years. I think it was not long before his birthday, he'd said, I don't want to have a birthday, I don't want to have a party, and I don't want any presents. So we organised a secret surprise party, and we bought him presents.
Just as he wanted.
And he held court in his living room, and we took turns, but there weren't too many people because he was very frail at that point, and so I think we were allowed 10 people in at a time. But I was in a charity shop and I found a Marianda Tray mug from the 1980s, which actually I think matches one in the collection, but he would have sold it in the 1980s. And I just thought, okay, he doesn't want a birthday present, but so I bought it and wrapped it up, and when I went to see him I said, I found this in a charity shop for your birthday. And he unwrapped it and he was so pleased. I think the object itself was about a much loved friend of his. It's in the other room somewhere.
Oh, nice.
But it's difficult. Yes, I suppose. Yes, I mean he very much wanted a large James Tower pot. The Peter Wright plate I have is inspired by James Tower. It would have been Wright would have known Tower well. And Ken has several smaller pieces. The one behind you. But he always wanted a large one. But they've got, as James Tower's reputation increased in recent years, he got rediscovered. They got beyond Ken's price range, and he wanted a big Lucy Ree, but very highly respected potter whom he sold in the guild, who would never let him buy her pots, always saying, no, Ken, you don't want that one. No, that's not good enough. I'll put something on the side for you. She said this to numerous collectors whom she knew, none of whom ever got a pot. So Ken, until very recently, didn't have one. And then a friend gave him a bottle, which is over there. So he did get a Lucy Ree in the end. It's a small black bottle.
That's so funny. Thank you so much for coming here today and talking to me about Ken and giving so much insightful information. Everyone's had that kind of own individual story and perspective of Ken, and it's so nice to hear different perspectives, and especially your one. So yeah, thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me.
The Stradling Collection hosts a combination of workshops, tours and exhibitions showcasing Ken's collection. We are a small charity based in Bristol, open to the public and accepting of donations and sponsorships. More details can be found on our website included in the episode description. Thanks for listening.